Hello Internet. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about dependency injection in Spring. So if you're not familiar, Spring is a Java framework that allows you to create web services. I've done a video on sort of getting started with it, and we're actually going to be using that same project to kind of build this. And so the basic idea is you create a controller, a service controller, and that will actually return something. In this case, our service returns an ID, which is going to be how many times the service has been called, some content, which in this case is just hello world of 0, and a timestamp of when you called it. And so that's just today's date. And so the way this works is, given a name in the field, it will actually give you a greeting specific to yourself. Otherwise, it will just use a generic one, which is just hello world. So if we just do greeting, we just get hello world. And if I go back, it's hello world of 0, because that's just what I entered. So that's sort of how this whole thing works. We're going to be looking at specifically dependency injection, which is a really handy way to do like inversion of control. So what is dependency injection? I'm going to screw this up, but I'm going to try anyway. So dependency injection is, think of, what's a good way to think about that? Think of your car. Your car has a lot of components and stuff that you might want, or your computer has a bunch of specific things. It's got a graphics card and all of this other things. The way this works is effectively you create something that says, I need this. I need a graphics card and I need a CPU. And then something else says, oh, I have a graphics card that can fit that parameter. It will fit that slot. And I have a CPU that will fit into your motherboard. You can do that with dependency injection. And that way your motherboard doesn't actually need to know anything about the CPU or the graphics card. It just needs something that will fit whatever the contract is that it has said, I need something that fits this contract. So the advantage of that is if you're trying to inject like a logger or say use a database across your application, it can be really handy to have all of the stuff that's just like, I need that, and have the application figure out how to get it to you. And so the cool thing is that this way you can kind of manage objects across multiple things, and they can all share the same object behind the scenes. So if you have a database controller that's handling a connection to a database, you don't necessarily want to recreate that every time somebody calls your service, for example, because that's just not great. But if you just say, I need a connection to a database, your service can just say, oh, here you go, use this one. And so that just works. It's really handy and kind of makes it really easy to do like an object-oriented thing, because you can define things in very separate things and just define them based on what they need, rather than trying to encapsulate everything within it and figure out how to actually acquire that within the application. It allows the back-end frameworks you're using to kind of manage that lifecycle rather than you manually writing that lifecycle and having to maintain it. Not really sure if that covers the entirety of it, but I think that's probably a good starting place. If you have other questions, leave them in the comments, because I'm sure I missed something or didn't cover something very well. So anyway, we're going to get started. There's 3 classes in this project. This is the basic application. This actually says start an application. You'll notice Spring is already off to its dependency injection ways. We're starting an application, which is here. It has no idea of any of these other classes. There's no reference to them, nothing. They're not in any import, they're nowhere. And so we're already kind of doing the dependency injection stuff. Our controller is defined as a REST controller, and that has a single request mapping on greeting, which takes an optional name and then returns it as this giant thing. We were kind of exploring a builder pattern when I was doing this, which is what this kind of demonstrates. So we don't necessarily need to go into that in super deep detail, but there's content, which is just formatting a string, and then we have our timestamp. What I want to do is I want to create something that currently we have our text formatting, we have our message formatting included in our controller. I don't want it there. So instead of having hello world encoded here and this template here, I want to take that out and put it in a separate class and just say, I want something that will format this. So the easiest way to do that is put it in a different package. Don't really know. I didn't really think this far ahead of what we're going to call this, but we'll call it our beans. The name doesn't particularly matter. This is just a sample application, but why not? We'll create a new Java class and we'll just call this our greeting generator. Sure. Why not? And so this works exactly like any normal class would. You've got your greeting generator. It's just a Java class. So we need two things. First, private list. Let's just make it an array. So a string array. Just jumped over from C#, so I'm going to be totally screwing up the way I type strings and booleans probably. But greeting templates. And so let's just create a set of greeting templates that we can use. And we'll just do a new array. I think this should work. Right. How many languages am I going to jump through to screw this up? Let's say hello %s. So %s is just going to be the replacement for our string. So wherever we put that is just going to be replaced with our new fun thing. It's becoming very obvious to me that I shouldn't be trying to cut corners here. So we're not. It'll allow me to introduce some of the other fun stuff. So the first thing we're going to want to do is have a public void init, which if our greeting template is equal to null, is going to result in creating a new greeting template, which is just generate greeting templates. Cool. And all of my hotkeys are totally screwed up because I just came from Visual Studio, so they're all different. So sorry about that. But we have our string array there. That should be fine. Let's return a new string array. Is this how this works? Hello %s. I think so. And then I just do that. Yep, pretty sure this is actually correct now. We could do this up there, but actually there's a good reason to do it this way, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I'm actually just going to use 1 for now because why not? And then the final thing we're going to do is just public string get random greeting. Now, in this case, there's just 1, so I'm actually not even going to return a random greeting. Technically, I suppose it is random. Just behind the scenes, it's not random. It's just always returning the first one. But you get the idea. Greeting templates of 0. There we go. So that's always just going to return the first one, which means we're going to see the same behavior. It's just going to be a little bit different. Now, we haven't done anything for dependency injection. So if I were to stick this in our greeting controller, we're going to be sad because this isn't going to work. So let's create a private, what do we call this? Greeting generator. Greeting generator. So let's import that. Oops. I'll get there eventually. There we go. And so instead of doing all this formatting stuff, let's plug in our template here. So greeting generator to get random greeting. We could, I suppose, format it here, but I just want to just keep it as basic as possible. We don't need anything to be super crazy. The problem is this really isn't going to work. Like really not going to work. We can try it. It's just how would you get this? How would you get this greeting generator? Right now you wouldn't. So there's no real way. The interesting thing is you can do a lot of things. Spring gives you a lot of freedom as far as dependency injection goes and how all of that happens. Like these REST controllers are just pulled from the class path, which is great because it makes it really easy to define those. The problem is if you pull in a library that has REST endpoints defined, REST controllers defined, you're just going to get additional REST endpoints on your service, whatever it might be, that you may not necessarily know about unless you actually go and figure out what all the beans are. We run into a few of that, so it can be a little bit difficult to manage, I guess, is the way I would describe it. And you might see some behavior you weren't expecting. So we can run this again, and that didn't work. We got this application has no explicit mapping for error because we got a giant stack trace, which is just a really scary way of saying null pointer exception. That's because greeting generator is not a thing. Well, it is, but it doesn't exist. So the way we need to do this is at inject or auto wired. So at inject and auto wired are two different things that do the same thing. Auto wired is going to be Spring's thing. Inject is coming from a different library that I don't remember. You may see one or the other, especially if you're already working with this kind of stuff. They both do the same thing. They both mean the same thing. And effectively what that is saying is, for all the beans that are defined, go and find one that is a greeting generator in this case. And so if there is a bean defined, it's going to find that and replace the value of this with this greeting generator. When does that happen? Shortly before. When is it? We actually need to do this, so I'm just going to do it. This init would never be called. There's a post construct thing. So if I say after this thing has been constructed, this will be immediately after all of your dependency or your what's it called? Your dependency injection has happened. After all of that has been resolved, your post constructs can get called, which is effectively a good way to do initialization, especially if you actually rely on those things to initialize yourself. We could initialize in a constructor, and that would work fine. But if you're doing something where you need to like grab the configuration, for example, you can't really do that if you are depending on that configuration being injected from somewhere. So this gives you a way to kind of grab that. Anyway, once we have that, we now have our post construct. That's going to actually construct our class. And sort of the easiest way I've found is to, what's it called? A component. So if you create a component, that's going to create a named thing. There's a number of different ways. There's two real dependency injection libraries that I've used. Inject comes from one of them. AutoWired comes from the other. Component comes from one of them. And there's another one called named, which will give you a named component or a named thing. So if you have like duplicates, say we have two greeting generators and one of them does something and one of them does something else. Or if you have like two Mongo databases, you may need to inject one or the other. And in order to do that, you need to kind of give them names. At least if you do it that way, you don't need to re-implement them with something else. So that, anyway, getting ahead of myself, we don't really need to worry about that because we already have this greeting generator. It's implementing a component. Pretty sure this is what I want. Indicates an annotated class as a component. Such classes are considered as candidates for auto detection when using annotation-based configuration and class path scanning. Yes, that is what I want. Okay, cool. So now that we've got all of this, we should be able to actually get everything working. So there shouldn't be anything else that's required. That's a test. Now that we've said, I want to auto wire this component or this property, this field, equal for a greeting generator, and I've registered it as a component, everything should work. So if I run this again, theoretically, we don't get this null pointer anymore. Everything just works, which is a really complicated way of adding a bunch of code, but making it really powerful to abstract away some of the more complicated bits. There we go. So now we've got our greeting. We didn't get a null pointer exception. Everything's doing exactly what we had hoped. So I guess that's it. That's the basics of dependency injection in Spring. There's a lot of things that can get in your way when you're doing this. For example, if for on your class path you have something that is a component, it may just get injected for you because you wanted it to. That can be good if you're managing that well, but a lot of times it gets, especially in bigger projects, it gets really hard to do that. So especially if you're pulling in some library, if you've defined components in that library or a controller or something else, doing that gives that library side effects, and that's not necessarily always something you want. So use it with caution. It's a really handy tool for something like this because we were able to pull out this dependency and actually make it completely separate, but at the same time keep everything kind of coupled. We still know what's happening here. I don't need to build the generator. I could use that same class in other places, and it would all reference the same object. That's handy. But at the same time, if you just use it everywhere, it can be really hard to follow and kind of identify what's going on. Because if I were to, like, you saw what happened if this auto wired wasn't there. If I take this out, we're back into null pointer city. We don't want that. And if I take it out on the other one, on the actual component, if I remove that component, it's no longer a bean, and we're also in the same spot. So figuring out all of those issues can be a little bit, it can be a little bit complicated if you're not super familiar with it. But hopefully this is enough to kind of get you exploring this topic. I didn't go super in depth. There's a lot more you can do with it, but hopefully it's enough that you kind of are knowledgeable enough that you're welcome to go and explore it more. So I'll post some links to the previous spring stuff we've done, as well as like the Spock tests. Check that out. And if this is more of what you want, let me know in the comments and we can definitely do that. If you think I missed something, definitely let me know and I can definitely fill in those gaps in a later video. But that's it for this video. So until next time, see you, Internet.